Before we get started, I do want to welcome Bob Cooper, who is the newest member of our task force. Mayor Cooper, it's all Coopers here. Mayor Cooper announced at our last meeting that Bob would be joining us. Bob has now taken the helm at Metro Legal, and so welcome, Bob.
Thank you. I look forward to working with this distinguished group.
And then, so sitting in Mary Falls' chair is, as you will notice, not Mary Falls, but is John Button, who will be representing the mayor's office at this meeting because Mary is out of town. So welcome to John.
Thank you for having me, and I second his comments.
Okay, so we made some really great progress at our last meeting, and I think one of the most important things that we did is arrive at sort of a meeting of the minds as to our scope of work. And I'm just going to keep re-emphasizing our scope of work until you are all sick of hearing about it and I am blue in the face. But just as a reminder, and I have more copies of our scope of work up here in case, actually Judge Escobar, can you guys hand that down to her? Does anybody else need a copy? All right, so just in a nutshell, we have a job to do, and we've got a job to do until by December 13th, and that is to do three things. Describe to the mayor's office or in a report the current practices related to requests for assistance from federal immigration authorities and how those are reported to the mayor's office. So just describing current practices, making some suggestions related to that second part, what should a reporting piece look like, and then outlining some sample policies from other cities. And so per our discussion at our last meeting, this task force is doing such critical work in doing sort of a landscape analysis that will lay the foundation for future policymaking. And I'm just going to keep on saying that. But really, I mean, this work is so important that I think we've got the right group, absolutely, to get that done. The other thing that we did was agree on the questions that we wanted to ask Metro departments on a couple of different pieces, right? We had threshold questions, and I circulated these all to you before we sent them to the mayor's office, who got them to the departments. So there's some threshold questions. Have you ever gotten requests from federal immigration authorities? There are some questions about reporting. Who calls whom by when you've received such a request? And then the third piece is compliance. So what do you do when you get that request? So we agreed on those questions. Thank you so much to the mayor's office for getting those questions out to the departments and then getting answers back from many of our departments and some of our offices. We had chosen 12 that we wanted to ask, so we got responses back from a lot of them. And then we also last meeting deferred our review of sample policies from other cities until this meeting, so we'll be looking at that too. So if you look at the top of your agenda, you can see that we've got 3 goals for this meeting. We're looking at the reporting piece. We want to understand Metro Department and sometimes offices, policies or practices related to reporting requests to the mayor's office. And here's where we do more of the suggestion. This is the one time that we'll really be suggesting pieces. I think if we leave this meeting today having agreed on some key pieces of a reporting policy, that would be really great progress. And we'll also be looking at those sample policies from other cities. So with that said,
Can I mention one thing?
Please do. Yep.
I need to apologize. This isn't the first time I didn't do my homework on time in my life. But we're trying to get some of the questions. Ours are a little bit more complex as it relates to, we could walk through any piece of this, but just to make sure I get everything accurately turned in, I guess you will. So I'm going to work with Metro Legal and getting some of these things resolved. I mean, you can take the very first question on here if you wanted to think about it. Nashville residents, does your department collect information from Nashville residents that is potentially related to immigration? The reality of our world is that when you're fingerprinted on any arrest in Nashville, as it relates to your fingerprints under the Obama administration became what was secure communities. Those fingerprints are automatically shared with immigration. You have no way to stop that from happening. So those prints clearly have some involvement with immigration because in the immigration system, that's what they use biometrically to make their decisions. So ours are a little more complicated than that's required by law, and so I just want to make sure we get the accurate responses back to each one of these, and I was trying to get in touch with my own attorneys inside and Metro Legal. So we're going to get them. I'm surely not. I just wanted to wanted to make sure everyone was aware. And we can, I don't think this is all about the sheriff's office, but we can answer any of those questions once we get them out to you, so make sure everybody understands it's not. And of course, there's the anti-sanctuary city law that forces us to cooperate in other ways. So just want to get all that put together, and we'll get it to Shauna, and you can get it to everybody else.
Perfect. And as soon as we get it from you, Sheriff, we'll circulate it to the full group. So I've got a copy of the questions here, and I'm happy to run through them. But I was hoping now, and Audrey, if you could pull up the slides are already pulled up. Perfect. So full disclosure, we're going to be walking through these responses together, and it's my first time too. So we're all sort of learning. So we're all sort of learning what these responses are together. But the mayor's office put together a really helpful chart, which you guys will see here and also there. And so I was hoping that what we could do is sort of just walk through, again, we're just focusing on the reporting piece, but let's walk through who's got, who's ever even had a question from the mayor's, or, from Federal Immigration Authority, sort of those threshold questions, and then what do they do about reporting? And so as you can really see on this chart, the responses that we got back, most of the folks do not have a policy about the way that they would report something to the mayor's office. This is as we predicted at our last meeting, right? And in a way, it underscores the need for this task force, because if a lot of our departments don't have a policy, we can work with them to get one. And so just a quick reminder, we asked for this from 12 departments or offices. I'm just going to run down that list real quick. Schools, health, police, courts and judges, fire, sheriff, MDHA, parks, NES, waters, libraries, and codes. We have responses from the sheriff. Just mentioned that his is currently under review, and we'll get that as soon as they've got it. We're waiting on the General Sessions Courts Administrator, and we're waiting on NES. But other than that, I'm just, again, thanks to the mayor's office for helping us get responses back so quickly. So I think this is up to you all. I mean, so there's this information in the chart, and there's actually a second page to this. And you can see all of them in your handout here. Do we want to walk through the responses that we got from each of the responding departments? Or do we want to just use the chart and sort of recognize that, yep, most of these folks don't have a policy, and let's just get right to coming up with the key pieces of a policy? Do we want to walk through them real quick? Or alternatively, you've got them in front of you, and we could just recognize that most folks don't have one. Most departments don't have one.
This would be interesting if the people who are represented at the table who responded maybe gave a summary of what I said.
I love that.
Provide a little color. So, I mean, I'm curious to hear more from MNPD. Not to put you on the spot, but and I can talk first about schools. That'd be helpful.
That'd be great, Hank. Yeah.
Okay.
Why don't you start us off with the schools one, and then
if you refer to this packet, it actually has our response in there. It's the back page, I believe. So we turned it in at like 5:30 last night. And yeah, so we had the responses to the questions, and then we attached guidance from the Tennessee Department of Education. We have a Supreme Court case that gives protection for, or that says that we should educate all students, and so that guides a lot of this. But we don't have a lot of formal in place that's just specific to immigration. We have more as it's regard to records, policies, what is considered public information, and through that, we also are very careful about what information we do collect, because obviously anything we do collect, is always at jeopardy, and so that was part of our response as well, is that we try not to collect some information.
all right, Hank, thank you for that. And Deputy Chief Hager, do you want to just walk through MNPD's?
So obviously, we collect a lot of data as we either take reports from victims of crime, which could necessarily include victim information, suspect information, or witness information. Also, obviously, as we arrest people, we have a responsibility to accurately identify those people, mainly because we do have a lot of instances where people use someone else's name. So we have to verify that identification. Immigration is not a question that we ask. It's frankly irrelevant to anything we do. There's one instance where immigration does come up with MNPD, and that's when we process U visas. That is rare. Most of the time, those are processed at the district attorney's office. And that is typically self-reported to us by the person seeking that status. We comply with public records law in releasing that information. In most cases, victim, suspect stuff is redacted, either under public records law or as it relates to an open criminal case. I'm happy to go into more detail if anybody has any specific questions. We have a policy about cooperating with other agencies. If it's a request that's non-emergency, it has to be approved by someone, chief of police or his designee. Typically, that occurs at the commander level in the precincts. Those are fairly rare. So.
It may help a little bit too, just since we're talking about this. A lot of people don't understand that in Nashville, so the arrest is made by the police department. That individual is handed off to us in the sheriff's office. We actually are booking the person on the charges of which the police have leveraged, if you will. That's the charge. So basically, the information that's coming in off the streets for the arrest is entered by the police department, and then of course we're fingerprinting, photographing, and doing the process. But we do not. It's kind of strange. We don't collect that information. It's really the police collecting it, entering it, I guess automated wise, transfers over to us, and of course the individual's housed with us throughout the time. What I mentioned a minute ago, and we'll get this in writing to make sure everybody has a copy of it, but when we take the prisoner, the arrestee from the police department, and we're booking them on the local charges, everyone must be by law fingerprinted. And that print is what I was talking about a minute ago, is automatically shared via the secure communities environment. So we don't reprint them for immigration, but the prints for the local arrest are what's automatically shared across the system. And the data that we would so-called collect really is police data, the arrest information, and then we enter all that into the system. So in some ways we're the robots for what the arrest was, and they're housed with us. So there's other stuff. We'll answer that as we go, but people are confused. Most communities, the sheriffs arrest people. We do not. And so it's worth noting that there's two different operations, and we kind of perform their task for them once the person's arrested.
Do you all collect primary language information?
We do not. Now, we're asking, again, there's a health department lives in the jail, of course, and we do have language lines and operations, but we are not, one of the things I was going to bring up years ago, place of birth was on the arrest report.
Place of birth still is.
Okay, and so that transfers, whatever is collected there transfers in typically, from the police side, but we're not asking that information. One of the things that makes these questions a little delicate is we're not asking it, but we have it via the police. It would be shared if it doesn't fall under some protection of other ways publicly. The arrest information is who was arrested, what was your charges, and all that. Would be a public records request. So in a weird way, we're sitting between the police and the courts because we're holding the individual based on their data, and obviously going to do with the individual what the courts decide. But so we have it, we would share it, but it's in essence, it's really the police data that we have on the arrest. So we'll get that a little more formal. I was just picking up on Mike's handoff. As the person comes to us, then we don't redo all of that. We're basically using their information to collect.
Do you guys add any further questions to their data in the booking?
Other than housing information, like we're talking about addictions and health and your conditions and and your criminal history helps us decide where you're going to be placed, but we're not collecting that. Well, it's criminal history. It's not collected from you. It's your criminal history. That's public record as well. Shouldn't be any other stuff. We may be asking you questions about program needs and what are your I can't imagine. We can pull all that, but it's really more about we're assessing your needs while you're here. Some of that's going to be protected under the HIPAA issues as it relates to addictions and mental health. But we're really not rebooking you. That we used to do that until '96, and we would redo everything. So the information's collected. 95% of that's going to be done before they ever arrive, and then just transfers in. I can't imagine anything else. I'll get you whatever that is, but our purpose in the process is really, that's done by the entity here, and we're waiting on the courts to tell us what to do. While you're with us, custody-wise, very little of that is collected information. It may be medical or it could be courts, but it's not necessarily collected by us. Probably a few exceptions to that, but I'm not sure what exactly. What are you thinking? What is?
I think you guys do gather language, because in my memory, that was usually in the system. That was something we could see. There was a flag for that.
Tell me what you're saying.
Tell me
Asking.
what?
Well, tell me what you're saying. What do you mean language? Are we asking?
What their primary language is. It seems to me that there was very often, when we would look, as a public defender, when I would look in JMS, there would be a flag for people who were not English speakers.
There's no flag for that. There's a flag for mental health and escape risk, but there's no flag for.
Then it was a flag for immigration, but not necessarily a detainer. There would be a flag by most Latino names.
Okay.
Which I've always thought was immigration. I mean, was language, not immigration. So that's why I was asking about the language issue.
There is no flag for your language. There would be holds on immigration historically,
This was separate from that.
but that would not be language. The issues we
Right.
deal with in language are, what are your needs in booking? I mean, we're trying to communicate with you, but that's done
Right.
via the language line. We don't enter that into the system to identify what language you're speaking. So, and we have flags for all sorts of special needs, but not language at all.
Okay. It was my understanding also several years ago when we were dealing in the court system with this, we were trying to figure out how to access interpreters earlier in the court system, and it was my understanding then that DCSO did keep records of people's primary languages. So people who are not conversant in English or not able to proceed in English.
I'll double check. That's not my memory at all, and we don't flag people for language for sure. So.
All right, I think, Sheriff, if you could look into that, and I'm going to shift us back into the piece of this that looks at reporting policies. So you've got the answers from the metro departments, and I think what we can see, and just having Hank and Mike walk through the pieces were really helpful. But I think as you can see from what you've got in front of you, most folks don't have a reporting policy, and if they do have it, they're just not all uniform, right? So I was hoping that we could take the next little bit, and again, this is kind of the fun part, because this is where we do get to make some policy suggestions to the mayor's office. But if we could just, if we're thinking about a reporting policy that we would want to see for all metro departments, and remember last time Cindy was really helpful in walking us through kind of what's a department and what's an office, and the mayor's office can require departments to do things. It's more of an ask with other folks, but thinking about if we had a model policy, what pieces would that model policy contain? I would love to spend some time thinking about that. And I think the first question really is that, to whom does it apply, right? So let's just start there. Do we sort of agree that this policy applies to the departments as a sort of, if the mayor's telling folks, like, this is what you shall do, it applies to the departments over which the mayor has control? Yes. And Cindy, I'm sure you'd be happy to walk us through those again if we need it. But so with respect to sort of outside the scope of that, perhaps it's more of a request than a mandate. Yes? Okay, so that was the easy part. We agree that this policy applies to departments, and it's an ask of everybody else. I'm going to just...
Ask and a recommendation.
Yes. Yes, ask and a recommendation. I might just write this up here so that we can all stay on the same page. And because I've always wanted to be able to write on a board like this. All right, model.
We're hiring teachers.
Model reporting policy. All right, so we've got the who, and that is departments, and then others, including offices or folks with the independent boards, right, Cindy, that you walked us through?
Or elected officials.
And then this is the recommendation. Okay, one. The next, so I'll walk you through what my thoughts were, but then so eager to have pushback. But the next question I thought was relevant is the triggering action. So again, this is all about when somebody at Parks calls somebody in the mayor's office, right? So the question that I had is, what is the triggering action that would require that phone call? So if that seems like a next good piece, let's figure out what that is. And I think there's some options for this, right? Because it could be some past language. I was looking at Mayor Briley's executive order that had a reporting piece to it. And the piece that was in there was anytime you got a request to support or assist in an immigration enforcement action. Request to support or assist in an immigration enforcement operation, rather. So is that the triggering action? Is it broader than that? If it's broader than that, like you don't want to paint with too broad of a brush. So what's the right sort of triggering action that would put into place that next chain of actions? Yeah, Hank.
I think our experience at least has been that it's a little bit difficult. It's not necessarily asked specifically related to immigration, and so it's a little difficult to determine what is immigration at the moment, especially for frontline workers that are going to be asked about it.
Yeah, and to elevate that point, reading a warrant for a person that has not been ever exposed to training, to elevate your point, is how to differentiate or how to discern that it's an actual request.
A request versus like how do you know why they're asking? Okay. Yeah.
I think on a couple levels, broader language is appropriate because it is often not immediately clear who you're talking to, what they're asking about. So I think a first thing would be, I would hope that most agencies would require some sort of identification about the person who is requesting information. But in order to make it simpler and make sure we get the information we want, my suggestion would be that it is any contact or communication, either externally, either on, external facing, meaning somebody from, let's say, the DA's office calls ICE for some reason, or incoming, meaning somebody at MNPS gets a request from anybody in, a DHS employee, so ICE or HSI, about anything. I would just say, I think having it just be contact, communication, is the simplest way. I think there is also an easy carve-out for the fingerprints. Because I think that A is automatic. So I think anything that's automated is a carve-out. And fingerprints go to everybody, right? So if I get arrested, my fingerprints are going out. They're going to FBI, they're going to DHS. You guys don't do any sort of targeting and specifically sending them to information. They go to the federal government, and then they get divvied out, is my understanding.
We need to include new pieces.
Yes.
I think there's a couple of questions, though. I mean, for example, I don't want to make this all about the sheriff's office, but one part of it that's important is once the prints are shared, if immigration then is interested in wanting you, the way by law that we cooperate with them is then the warrant and detainer arrives with us, and then we are obviously required then to cooperate in that exchange. So, and I would not be interested, this is not Darren, but the sheriff's office doesn't need to communicate that exchange to anybody. I mean, we can give you monthly data or whatever you want, that's easy. But that occurs upon the booking process and usually within a few hours of all that happening. So I would be encouraging some language that says either unusual or monthly, or because if you're going to say, and here's the other thing I'm nervous about, we're not going to ask the public, who are you? Right? Where do you work? What do you do? I mean, I get in all kind of trouble for asking the citizenry who asks me for all kinds of data. Mm-hmm. Right? And so we need to be careful that we don't, because then we're asking people, let's assume you work at the bank. You're highly offended that I'm saying, where do you work? You could be in a suit or you could be in shorts. It doesn't matter to me. And why are we going to ask who is asking for the information?
Are there situations in which people are asked? For example, I would assume that it is, I mean, there were issues with M&PS where people came in to ask for information. It's now a little unclear who they were. Normally, if people were coming into M&PS to ask for something, I know whenever I go in for my kids, I've got to show them who I am. So I think in some situations, we are already or should be asking for that information.
But that's
Do you
not
guys
public
have that?
records. Yeah, I mean, no, we have lawyers all over the place. I'm sure they're lawyers because I know them, but we don't ask them where you work. We don't ask you what you do. And if the public were wanting jail records from last month, that's public records. And we're not going to say, who are you, why do you want it? So and I'm not talking about just the sheriff's office. I would be very careful to start requiring of the public, what do you do and why are you wanting the information?
Doesn't MSPD have a form that people need to fill out before you'll give out?
On certain records requests, there is a form, and that requests a copy of your driver's license. Basically, Tennessee records law requires you to be a citizen, but that's not required for every record you get from records. If you pick up an accident report or an incident report, we don't do that.
And our stuff, I mean, it could be everything from a lawyer looking for a jail record to the family wanting to check if they were in. I mean, there's a lot of, and so I'm just trying to be, I would be very careful to start figuring out who are they that want this information. And I know
In what situations do you ask? I mean, like if ICE calls and says, put a detainer, you know it's ICE, right?
Right.
I can't call and ask that somebody have a detainer on them.
Right.
I mean, so there are situations in which, maybe not just sort of public records sharing, but there are situations in which the identity or affiliation of the person calling matters.
Well, we don't do it on the phone. I mean, it's sent, and we have actual
If I
papers
sent
signed
you
by
in
ICE.
ICE paperwork, you wouldn't hold somebody.
So what is your point?
My point is that there are communications that you have where the identity of the other person is known and is relevant. So maybe what we do, there are communications that your office has with ICE knowing that it is ICE.
Right.
ICE will call and say, hey, can you put this person in booking on the phone so we can talk to them? If I just called and said, hey, can you put this person on the phone, I would be told no. So maybe the issue is not so much things that come through public records, because I agree with that. I mean, A, I don't think there's much we can do about it, and B, you're right. But to identify the places where either we think for going into schools, the identity should matter, or where, in actuality, currently the identity does matter or is currently known.
But that's not because of what they're asking for. You're doing that for your security of your school. I mean, I would want you to know who's in your building, not because of anything we're here to talk about today. I mean, that should be. And so I would just caution. I mean, lawyers like you are going to be screaming at me for asking the general public questions that are none of my business. Forget immigration.
Okay, so
I don't want to be in another task force
beyond that.
figuring out that subject. So I'm just saying we got to be mindful of that.
I think that's important, and like you said, Mary Kathleen, let's just thinking beyond it, like what is the purpose of this reporting policy, right? Like what do we want the mayor's office to know? And it's not necessarily like every time a parent goes into a school or every time somebody makes a public records request of you, Sheriff. And so what really is the most important? And we know, like, we can't be, let's say John is the guy in the mayor's office. John, if we send John like 5,000 examples a year of contact, like things are going to get lost in that haystack then. So John, I'm just going to target you for a second. Like what's the most important thing that John needs to know? What does he really need to know about?
And I would say a couple of things. One is information or assistance which is requested or given based on who ICE is. So for example, being allowed to speak to somebody in booking, or being allowed to put a detainer on somebody, or being allowed to ask for assistance in an operation. So that's one. And the other, I would say, is information or communication where ICE's identification is clear. And what I'm referring to there is, for example, the probation office issue. Arguably, some of that information, I think not all of it, but much of the information that was transferred would have been available through public records. But it is very clear that everybody knew it was immigration asking, and that is part of why that level of assistance was given. So I think I would say where it is either known or where there is some special level of interaction beyond just what would be given to any level of the public pursuant to public records.
What do the rest of y'all think? What's the most important thing most important piece, when does the mayor's office really need to know?
Do you think it's like, Mary Catherine, you seem to be distinguishing between one person or the agency asking about one person versus asking for a compilation of a ton of documents or names, or is that what your distinction is?
I mean, I think every time it asks for, it always asks for targeted people. I think, I mean, like with the probation office, that is, some of the general information probably had to be turned over under public records. Their list of everybody who is on. So I think 2 points. One is, I think you're right. I think had they said, send us just information about people who might not be citizens. Send us just information about people who have an O at the end of their name, whatever. I think that's something that should be recorded. But I think even in that situation, because it was known by everybody that this was who was making the request and frankly what the purpose of the request was, I think that's something that the public would be interested in, and in the interest of transparency would be good for people to be aware of. So I think it's when it's targeted towards specific people, when it is very clear this is immigration, you know, hey, I'm coming from immigration, we'd like to get this information, or again, when it is something specific that just your random person off the street would not have access to. And that is external as well. And again, I'm going to go back to the office of, or the question of a DA or a police officer or somebody who might call immigration and say, do you have information on this person? Can you verify this person's status for me? Is that distinction?
What's your response to that?
One, in my 30 years here, we've never done that. So, you know, I guess, I'm sorry.
He's never called, right,
Yeah.
to make that sort of.
Other agencies have.
Well, it's not relevant to what we do, so I guess I come back to what does the mayor's office want to know?
Yeah.
I don't want to be flooding John or the mayor with a bunch of information, whether it's booking list or whatever, if they don't want to know it. And on some level, you're kind of creating a new public record of condensed information. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I'm hearing two sort of competing ideologies with respect to telling the mayor's office is really telling the public, right? And the public wants to know this broad swath of information. Or are we telling the mayor's office to tell the mayor's office because we really want to be able to distill for them what is actionable? Like, these are the cases that the mayor's office may have a responsibility to intervene in or somehow interact with. And maybe that's the disparity here. You know, those are the two sides. So what are we really looking to do? Hey, John, what do you want to see?
So first, I mean, it's very helpful to see these survey results and just to know, I mean, the question is what type of contact has been happening? And looking at this, it is clear that many departments and agencies are not being contacted in any regular basis, and that's good to know as a matter of factual record. And it's good to think about and maybe spend some time, you know, asking those departments if there are situations in which they could envision some kind of contact. And if that were to happen, under what scenario might it happen? I think it would be valuable to talk about, you know, if there are some plausible scenarios, how do we put a policy in place that would address those scenarios? So, for instance, Codes hasn't been contacted but does have a policy. It'd be interesting to know more about why did they put a policy in place? What are the scenarios that they're concerned about? And spending some time thinking about whether other departments also need to consider that, I think would be very helpful for us. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts.
in that same category.
Yes.
Contact and has a policy. I think the same questions would be interesting for them to answer.
Exactly.
I would add, I like you saying, what sort of could we foresee happening in the future? I mean, the reality is that things are happening now that 2 years ago none of us would have thought could ever have happened. So just because somebody hasn't gotten requests now doesn't mean it won't happen in the future, and we want to have something that covers contingencies.
And so that might be something that we recommend in our report. You know, this is, again, just a stepping stone on the way to policy, but one of the things, John, picking up with what you said, that we might suggest is, as whoever's writing this policy is figuring out what the parameters of the policy are, we recommend that you go to codes and you go to MDHA and you go to other departments and ask them, what do you envision? So that we can make sure that the reporting policy is sort of consistent with what they envision could, like you said, Mary Catherine, we're in a new time, like what do you envision? So maybe our job right now is to come up with 2 potential triggering actions, and then also a note that, this needs further research, and this is what the further research looks like.
Can I also say, I think you made a really good point or you, Anna. There are 2 ultimate purposes. One is transparency with the public, which is sort of broader data. This many people, or the police, let me use you as an example. It started for some reason, never have done it, but the police contacted ICE this many times in this quarter about, these issues. Or the sheriff received this many detainers in this quarter. So sort of broader collating information versus, and I think that maybe the discussion about that needs to be separate from sort of emergency or time-sensitive issues where the mayor's office would want to be informed so that they could make an immediate reaction.
I think we need to separate, as we talk about ICE broadly, recognize they have other duties, customs enforcement, for example. Drug smuggling is a big issue at the airport. If we contact ICE about a drug smuggling issue or a shipment coming in through FedEx or the airport mail facility, that doesn't really need to be reported. We're talking about immigration issues.
And I think that's where we see in other examples, it's been a request to support or assist in an immigration enforcement operation, pretty narrow, keeps out drugs at the airport.
My concern with that language is who knows what's an enforcement operation or not.
Yes.
And there was a media, and I can't remember the exact city where ICE recently went to a school and acknowledged that it went to the school to get information about one of the students, but then said, but it was information, it wasn't actually for enforcement. So I want us to veer away from this language of enforcement.
So how do you veer away from the language of enforcement but not capture drug smugglers at the airport?
Call it an immigration issue.
Can you outline a little bit more for us maybe, is there anybody other than your department who would have contact with ICE or DHS for things like that, other than for sort of immigration central issues?
Anybody other than us?
Yeah, any other agencies?
In Metro?
Yes.
I mean, we may, and I need to look at, randomly have, people who are charged with certain things that have nothing to do with immigration, and I could go look to make sure of that. But, if there could be property involved with customs-related matters, we're housing the persons in their property. Mm-hmm. I mean, I could think of random situations, but that's rare, very rare.
Maybe a probation officer if the person's on probation. It's going to be the exception rather than...
Right. I mean, I guess one thing to do is to sort of identify those points and make carve-outs. I don't know all those points, but that is one.
Again, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is if the goal of the task force is to help the community understand what's going on, my belief is that we need to get as clear about those things as we can. And again, I'm not saying that you can't have exceptions or strange things, but to say that in the course of your business in a regular way, I can report monthly how many times we get warrants and detainers. That's easy to do. It's no work. And then the other, for someone from immigration to reach out to me and say, we'd like for you to change your policy, I'd report that if you want me to report that. But I'm not going to report every time that there's interaction and conversations about cases and situations. I don't deal with those every day, and I don't want to be dealing with them. There's not that many. There's 11 a month out of 4,000 people. So the reality of what I'm saying is it feels like we would want the task force to be able to explain to the community what our roles are with ICE. There's people who don't understand, and again, that's a huge. If we could ever get that done, we would be doing pretty well. Instead of panicking over these exceptions, which I think are important, but at least get what is the standard practice around here understood. People think we arrest people. That's not the job of this, right? And so I would love for them to understand that difference. Selfishly, and then I would like for them to understand. And I'm not just talking about the sheriff's office, but to clear up why you need to show up for court. We do more to get people their license than anybody in the county, right? So we need you to show up, and that program is designed for people who more than likely are undocumented, right? So I have a lot of reasons to want to clear all that up, but I think what we're doing here is we're sensationalizing the exceptions. And that's important to note, but we're not going to get anywhere unless we focus on communicating the norm.
I'm going to disagree, and I think that's where the numbers matter.
Really? I can't believe that.
I know. But I think that's where the numbers matter, because I think you're absolutely right that people need to have an accurate picture of what each agency does, what their relationship is, and I think numbers tell that story. I think if you can say, if Deputy Chief can say, we can show that our officers in the past 3 months have only ever had 2 contacts with ICE, and it was just because of this. Or can make that clear, I think that is in itself a huge step towards showing the reality of what contact there is and minimizing fear about it. Right now, it all feels like a black box, which you're right, breeds fear.
And I think we can argue all day, but that's duly diagnosed as to who's at fault. There's a lot of misinformation going around this county, equally shared, by the way, in my opinion, about what the facts are. So let's
get the facts out there.
Right.
Yeah.
And if we tell the facts, then the person in the community will be more likely to understand what our roles are. And I think the likelihood that you're going to come in contact with ICE, even in the criminal justice system, is very, very, very minimal. It is.
I disagree with that.
We're just focusing on the duty to report to the mayor's office.
Right. We're talking about
So,
numbers.
Tori, I know you've got some thoughts back there. What do you think? I see them.
Well, yeah, it seems to me, I really do think we need some direction from the mayor's office of saying, why do I want to be notified? Now, what I would think, this is just me, is that if there is of the known metro departments, if they are approached by ICE and said, we want to set up some kind of policy, some kind of working arrangement where we can share information or you can share information for immigration purposes, which may or may not lead to enforcement action. And it involves the metropolitan government and a department of metropolitan government entering into some kind of relationship like that. I would think the mayor would like to know that. He would not like to see it on the 6 o'clock news, and that be the first time that he knew something was that there was a working relationship. That to me is important.
We would certainly want to know.
Yeah. Now, so I think we could probably all agree on that is something that really needs to be addressed so that the mayor is in the loop and is able to say, brief me on this. Is this a good idea? Is it lawfully required? Whatever.
And that's around immigration enforcement operations.
Well, or something that could at least lead to that. Again, I think to Mary Catherine's point, I don't think anybody's going to necessarily walk in and say, by the way, this is for an enforcement action.
Right, right.
So I think that, but I'm thinking that if there's a policy, an agreement that's being struck by administrators and policy makers of individual departments with ICE in some sense, I think that's critical for the mayor to know it and to the extent the public know it. But now I'm less certain about individual actions or things that come up that are of more of an individual nature. I don't know that now it's one thing for the police to say or the sheriff to say, in the aggregate, this past month, we did the following things. That's fine. But I'm trying to figure out if we're trying to get into individual actions of an individual officer, an individual somebody at the front desk of some department. I don't know how we capture that. And even if we send that, it's more of a concern at the department level. In other words, maybe any policy tries to say, within your department, you ought to have some kind of internal policy. And then they then decide, Parks decides, well, we're starting to see a lot of these, I'm getting these reports, maybe I need to kick it upstairs to the mayor's office or to the legal department or something like that. I'm just trying to figure out how we don't overburden the mayor's office with a lot of irrelevant information, but at the same time be aware of major shifts or changes or requirements that we're not aware of.
Okay, I really like that dichotomy. Yeah. And so I think the first piece, and this is where there's some details to work out, but that first piece that you said, Tori, about, the requests that our departments are getting from that feel like they're either an immigration enforcement operation or something that feels sort of like an immigration enforcement operation, those things that you really don't want to see on the 6 o'clock news that you really want to figure out.
Immigration-related operation. I just think that keeping using the word enforcement is misleading. Or not intentionally, obviously, but I think it's...
And so,
I think it's time to agree with Mary Catherine on that.
Okay. All right, so.
I'm almost there.
I just love that you guys are all sitting next to each other. That's so beautiful. Okay.
One thing about this, and here's another thing I think that would help. We need to know what is being said that is being done. Maybe not right here. But as the end of the task force, one of the things that doesn't happen, at least in my organization, is if you feel like, there are people in this town right now scamming people out of money by saying you're the sheriff's deputies. My mother was scammed, and the same exact way. I've had some of the smartest lawyers in this town give money and then call me. I gave money on some card because they told me I didn't go to jury duty, and I'm not kidding. I could name them, but I won't. And what I'm trying to say is, that is totally outside of our operation, and it's illegal, and it's a crime, and so in return, if there is information that says the sheriff's office or whoever, when we finish this, is doing outside of what we're supposed to be doing, supposed to be as in, we need to know that. That's what I'm saying. Not only is there a crime to scam people, but if my staff are doing something they're not supposed to do, that's not happening very often either. So and what I'm saying is, we need to know, I want to know, if a person says that the sheriff's office is knocking on my door, they very well may be. We're knocking on doors to serve civil process. We don't arrest anybody.
There's a lot of confusion about that.
Right. But no one's ever called and said, so we need to know when you hear. We want the community to understand what we do as a requirement, right? We're not asking you to put money on cards.
I'll be calling you every day.
That's the thing. But so that's good, and I think that's probably and Juliana, probably you all too, future conversations about, so that everybody's clear on what the sheriff's office does and does not do, right? But can we get back to Tori's dichotomy? So now the piece that I think we all agree needs to be reported to the mayor's office is when you are a metro department is contacted about immigration-related operations or something that could lead to that. That still feels really squishy because I'm not sure how a frontline person is supposed to necessarily figure that out. So maybe, Hank, can you speak to that, just thinking about your frontline staff? Mm-hmm. Like, how can we write this in a way that could be implemented at schools to deal with your frontline staff or to give them enough guidance?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're still...
I don't want to jump. Can I just say one thing? I think it's one thing, like some individual may or may not identify themselves and shows up at some school and says, hey, can I look at this records for, this person? I'm thinking that's going to be hard to kind of get your hands around. I'm thinking, though, that somebody sits down and says, they call up the schools. They wouldn't do this, I don't think. But they call up the schools and say, I'd like to come in and sit down and talk to somebody on a supervisory level about how we can share information or how we can get information on a regular basis. That's the kind of thing I'm thinking the mayor really wants to know. Now,
maybe also that other piece, though, right, Tori?
I'm sorry?
Do you think also that the individual...
Well, that I think is something for the internal school or the school system to say, hey, if we get these sorts of things, or you're suspicious, or not, you think, well, that was odd or something, we ought to have an internal way, but I don't think you want to send it to the mayor's office every time.
I would say the community would find that information helpful. I don't know that the mayor's office has their own personal sort of interest in that. But again, part of the problem, as I'm going to agree with Darren a minute here, as Darren pointed out, is that there is all of this confusion about what ICE is asking for, when they're asking for it. So I think the more that can be clear, the more we can alleviate fear and encourage people to engage with the Metro services that we need them to engage with.
I would want the mayor's office to know. I mean, I don't know exactly what all information you all want or who's going to be fielding all of that, but I think it's important for the mayor's office to know when they should or step in or what's going on in the community, because they don't only represent, citizens and residents. They are also overseeing immigrants and people that are undocumented. So I don't know what you guys are looking for specifically, but that's something I would be very interested in you all having.
So
clearly, that policy piece and that arrangement piece is vitally important, and we would certainly want to know if there was any discussion of that sort happening. There are scenarios where, yes, if ICE agents were visiting schools and seeking information, we would certainly like to be aware of that type of incident. Of course, it's hard to identify the exceptional. That's one of the things that I'm grateful you're all thinking about and trying to do.
But it's important also to keep in mind what happens within those 4 hours or 5 hours of the incident and how quickly fear spreads throughout the community, and the benefit of having all of us here thinking this through in case something were to happen in the future. If we are the ones that get the phone call, be it Conexión America, Historic, you, what is the next step of action before it disseminates and permeates into the community when perhaps if something falls, as you were saying? And what is that piece? I think we can't lose sight in the fact that these are real people working in the front lines, and we all need that training on how to discern what is real, what is not, what is a scam, and how do we react in real time. And more importantly, how do we inform the community in a culturally competent, asset-based perspective that doesn't diminish what is happening in the fear, the real fear, palpable fear. Because within those 5 hours, by the time it gets to the 6 o'clock news, that is already creating panic in the community.
And so, Julian, I think that speaks to also sort of some department training requirements about identifying who is an immigration enforcement officer and what those internal processes might look like. But okay, just so, because I really want to write something on the board now, thinking about the trigger actions, I think and we don't have to come to a consensus. I think our goal sort of is just to list, like, these are the options. And so the most basic option that I think we all agree on is requests around immigration-related operations or something that could lead to that with respect to sort of that systemic, what you were saying, Hank, like somebody calls and says, hey, we're going to want to come sit down with somebody in management and talk about like every second grader or something like in bulk.
So we're talking policies or practices for ongoing communication.
So let's just write that down.
Okay.
I think that's the kind of basic, and we can move up from that. So, A is requests from federal immigration authorities.
Just put DHS.
And again, with the caveat that we may not necessarily know.
And that's where the internal stuff is going to come in, right? If federal immigration authorities or maybe suspected federal immigration authorities, does that cover it? Perceived.
I mean, this gets on the squishy. I mean, so we have 11,000 employees. Even if we have a perfect policy, training them is going to be difficult.
Yeah.
And then that's, people are scared in the moment. So I have some comments on that later on, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think some of this stuff, like, we're just not going to work out in this moment, but before it ever becomes a policy, we'll need some wordsmithing. But so let's just think about something like perceived.
Yeah, that's a good word.
Perceived immigration authorities. Okay, now, Mayor Catherine, say that policy piece.
I said policies or practices for any sort of ongoing or routine, I would say, communication. that what you were getting at, Tori? Does that cover that?
Yeah, I think so.
And I think we need practices in there because that the probation issue, for example, was a practice but not a policy.
Ongoing or routine cooperation?
I would say communication, or both cooperation or communication.
All right, does that feel right as a baseline? We definitely want that.
Yes.
And now we also might want, this is getting more to the individual, Juliana, that you were talking about, or maybe it was you, Councilwoman. So it's the same thing, requests from federal immigration authorities are perceived about, how do we capture that individual piece?
So are we I think about it temporally. So are we talking about how do we capture the piece where like the mayor's office would want to know today rather than in 3 months?
Yeah. This is the 6 o'clock news.
Y'all are old-fashioned. It's 6 seconds ago. I mean, it's instantaneous nowadays.
That's a good point.
You're right.
This is Twitter. Because sometimes the mayor's office is going to want to know and react to something, even if it's not about an ongoing kind of system of communication and cooperation. They want to know about an individual. So how do we capture that? I mean, is this the...
Well, to the sheriff's point, the mayor's office is probably going to find out from Twitter before the department head has an
That's really
opportunity
true.
to
I
make
mean,
them.
say it, try it, but
It may not be true on Twitter.
one of the things I was going to bring up at the perfect time is that I think that our advocates often find out things before we and we make and so, yeah.
It would be really good, this is not here, to have some response, kind of debriefing of an incident with both sides of the issues. And I'm not talking about ICE, I'm talking about the community because there's some failure on everybody's part. And I'm just talking about trying to figure it out. I think ICE does a horrible job of explaining what they're doing. Forget good or bad, right? I mean, you don't have any way to get information. And my opinion is, and when these things go on, whether it's with our organization or others, we could do ourselves some good in getting in a room soon and figuring out what happened, when, where, how. Forget just there. So the immigrant community understands that. The activists understand that. We really don't do that. We just take off, and there's all sorts of nuances to it. So, in our world, we debrief anytime there's an incident inside our world, and we don't debrief with the community, but why not?
What a great idea.
So maybe instead of a reporting requirement, it's a response requirement for however it comes up, that then there's a channel for involving the necessary players at the table to coordinate a response and at least coordinate the facts.
And for accountability purposes and governance, how do we document that formal phone call or email to check, right? Mm-hmm. If it's on Twitter that we find out, or the community work, if we find out, who do we call, who do we reach out in each specific office or organization or institution that is documented for the purposes of this part. When we get the call, who is the person? Is this a task force, or what is the next step to formalize it and to create systems and procedures?
Like who in the mayor's office you contact.
Right, or
It's not just the mayor's office, too, right?
Yeah.
Yes, and
Correct.
it's also maybe somebody else. Yeah.
in the absence of Sandra, Juliana, Mayor Catherine, you all, who is the person that needs to be communicating once we hear, if we hear, to either validate, dismantle, or say, let's just take a step back, assess the situation.
And I think that gets back to the sheriff's point. It'd be great if we all were working with the same set of facts. So I think that's sort of an ancillary but really important piece that speaks more to the advocacy groups or the community organizations. Like, who do you get something from one of the folks that you work with, who do you call? Maybe you also follow this, call the person in the mayor's office that we're going to figure out who that is in a second. But maybe there's some other procedure that you follow to make sure that you've got the right information and you're distributing the right information. Yeah?
And I would say that historically, at least for our organization, the mayor's office has been that hub. So when we have had a question, because the mayor's office is the easiest to get a hold of or to know sort of who to talk to, so that when we have had a question about what's going on, is this something, do you know, is it police, is it whatever, the mayor's office has provided that hub.
So did you talk to the Office of New Americans?
No, yes.
Do we know if there is an Office of New Americans anymore?
Well, that was going to be, I brought up that point in our last meeting because that's a direct source of information and contact between the government, the city, and the community.
All right, and we're going to get there, I promise, in a second, because we've got the who do you have to call in the mayor's office, but that's next. So for this one, I heard a sort of side piece about sort of some sort of protocol for community groups, right? And Bob, did you want to weigh in?
I was just wondering if it makes sense, just listening to the conversation, that perhaps we're talking about 3 categories of information here. One is, what are current processes in place, and what is the data that gets generated by that? I mean, kind of what we know we've agreed to, what comes in, this goes to, the fingerprints, this goes to kind of things we've talked about that we already know is going on. And perhaps there, we're just looking for periodic reporting, because we know that these are things we're already doing. Second, what you've got is a request to change any of those policies or procedures. And it would seem that, that's something that we would want a quick notice of to the mayor's office so that there can be a policy consideration, not just within the department, but citywide. Yeah. And then third, is there anything that happens that falls outside current policies and procedures? And I think that's the hardest one to get. And that's where we'll require in other words, someone showing up and asking for something that is unexpected, that doesn't fall within what we understand to be the current protocol. And that's where there's going to have to be training within each department or board, whatever, at the front line for those people to report it up. And I don't think we want to have the frontline people calling the mayor's office. They need to report it up, then have the supervisory management level assess it and determine whether that's something that needs to be reported to the mayor's office. But I wonder if that's helpful as kind of a conceptual way to look at this. And it sounds like the hard one's going to be the third one.
I would like us to spend, the one that Shauna has as third, I think, is ultimately, again, to go sort of back to Darren's point, the bulk of it. That we have the outliers, and we want to figure out how to catch the outliers.
Get the outliers.
But how do we also catch the data, the stats, the transparency for the community about sort of the daily interactions?
I think that's an important part, that we need to educate people about what goes on right now.
And with have numbers, because I don't think we have it now.
That's right.
So I think it's important to take an inventory, as you said, in point 1, of all the departments. Did y'all pick the 12 because they were the most?
We thought those were the most likely to have had some sort of contact. I can't remember some examples. There were some where they're not going to. But yeah, we were trying to narrow it for that.
Okay, Bob, that was really helpful. So this is sort of what we've got with respect to 3 potential triggering actions. So we've got the periodic reporting about current policies and practices, request from, and this would be, we're going to add in all the language, right? Federal immigration authorities are perceived. Request for changes to those policies or practices, and then the outliers, anything that falls outside of the bounds of that. Maybe can we use that as sort of a working draft of the triggering action? And once again, much like last meeting, this is such an important conversation, and I don't want to cut us off, so there is a reasonable possibility that we will, again, not get to looking at best practices from other cities or sample policies from other cities. Mayor Catherine gave us some examples last time. She's brought a new one this time. So I want us to have that conversation, but I think for this meeting, it's most important that we continue to talk through this stuff. And I know there's some other questions coming up for other pieces, so committed to getting us out on time. If we have to move that review of sample policies, we will once again do that. Mayor Catherine, I'm here.
To match a conversation that came up earlier, I wonder if there's also a receiving function from something that might, in the policy that might come from the mayor's office or from an outside advocate. Because, obviously we get embarrassed if we hear about something that a board member brings us that we didn't know about in administration, and maybe they heard from an advocate or something. But that's going to happen. It's going to continue to happen. So I wonder if in the policy it's like just acknowledging that we may hear about something not from the traditional chain of command, and that this is how we deal with that information once we see it, hear about it, and investigate whether it happened.
And I'd like to add on to that. A lot of times when we receive information, it's very uncertain if I could tell you how many times I've had conversations of, the sheriff is here to arrest me for immigration, and we say, okay, slow down, take a picture of the uniform. Okay, it is the sheriff. They're not there for immigration. They're not there for criminal. But it's often hard for us to know because the person who's calling us doesn't understand. So taking into account, A, how to clarify what's really happening, and B, the different sources that it may come through other than just going up the chain of command.
So is that a separate piece of this triggering action policy, or is that more about this protocol for community groups and how, who they call when they get a report, Hank, or I'm hearing something related to but different than that?
For example, if somebody had called in to the mayor's office and John calls me and says, hey, Hank, did this happen? I guess it may be a parking lot there, but just want to acknowledge that probably that's the most likely way that leadership will find out about something.
Oh, you want to be informed from whoever's spoken.
Yeah, just maybe the policy should be like a person that's, the designated person for the mayor's office to call once they hear about something.
Just in case a board member calls John and says, I saw on Twitter that this happened, and hasn't called you yet. It's sort of just making sure those communication channels are open. Yep. All right, so let's get that.
Having a contact person in the mayor's office for that, a specific person.
So that's what we're going to talk about. Okay, working draft of triggering actions. So now let's think about, let's just do a really easy one, timeline. So one of these things, so this is going to be different, right? This is periodic reporting. But thinking about this one in particular, something sort of an outlier has happened at one of the departments. They're going to call somebody in the mayor's office. We're going to figure out who that person is maybe in a second, but by when? Briley's executive order, Mayor Briley's executive order said 3 business days. Does that feel right? Should it be less than that? Should it be longer than that?
I'd like to also put that on its head, that let's say a community organization calls the mayor's office and says, we've had this information. What's then the turnaround for that? So we've had information that ICE is at the school. What's the turnaround then for MNPS to be able to respond back about that? Because I think you're right. I think it's not usually going to come up from inside.
So when a department reports, and it's, so yeah, when that comes up, so we're looking at a timeline for the department to report if they've had something, for the mayor's office to report if they've heard something from either a department or an outside, let's just say, a rogue board member, right? So it's for when the department reports, when the mayor's office responds, either to a report, to a department report, or outside source, yeah? And maybe we're not expecting the mayor's office to have come up with a policy solution within 3 business days. It's more just, this has happened. We have heard this. Yeah.
So, I would say that there are a couple of things, and speaking to your point, Bob, and to your point, Juliana, so, first, we do want, we want to hear about the outliers. That is important. Second, it seems like the merits of having some training or department policies in place so that, frontline employees can turn to managers and get guidance and have that outreach occur. That's entirely appropriate. Clearly you don't want to set up a structure where frontline employees, someone comes in and they're calling the mayor's office. That wouldn't be productive. So we're talking about some sort of complicated things. There's an incident, and you want the information to flow several ways. And of course, to speak to your point, you're right. This will also appear, online, and so we'll hear about that. Clearly, it's important for you to have open lines of communications with the mayor's office. That's really, and to you need to be able to talk to multiple people in the mayor's office when something comes up about incidents or about policies. We want that channel of communication to be open. I do think it is appropriate to have a period of time specified when we need to hear from departments about exceptional contacts or about policy proposals. I'm a little wary about creating all kinds of conflicting reporting deadlines and requirements. Just not quite sure how that would work.
Well, I would think on changes in policy, you want to be notified before they agree to the change of policy.
Clearly so.
Yeah, as long as they do that, then it would seem to be timely.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, so maybe some of these are just common sense, like you said, Bob, right? But some of them maybe do need to have that deadline so that the frontline staffer at Parks is compelled to tell his boss, who tells her boss, that somebody's got to talk to the mayor's office, and that needs to happen within a certain period of time, right? So when we're talking about timeline, we're really talking about timeline here, right?
Right.
And we're talking about reporting up.
And this is also, I think, where it would be very helpful to get a sense from departments that haven't had requests about scenarios where they think something could arise. I mean, it would certainly be, as one thinks about potential policy responses, it would just be helpful to get a sense of what are the universe of incidents that we might need to have a policy for. I mean, we know as a result of the reported or alleged ICE visit to schools that's the type of scenario where that could arise, and we do need a policy. So hearing from codes and MDHA about why they develop policies, what type of contacts, they were attempting to plan for, and asking other agencies, are there scenarios where you could envision something like this happening, would be really helpful to sort of think about, to understand before developing, policy protocols.
And that's probably policy protocols with respect to the substance, but let's say codes or MDHA has something happen, you want to know within 3 business days? Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so why don't we just use that for now, and then recognizing that these are suggestions that you're going to have some future conversation with codes, and they're going to say, well, no, we think it's within 24 hours, or absolutely not, we need 5 business days. Let's just
talking about a school, there's that sense of urgency if the information is unclear, where 3 days might be too long of a time when we're thinking about the implications. Let's say it was just erroneous information that there's in the community, the fear that it's creating.
That's a good point.
If I'm a parent and I heard that allegedly what ICE was asking for records, 3 days would be a little too long for me as a parent if it's not true, right?
Yep.
And if it's true, then of course, definitely. But 3 days seems to me is just pushing it. But again, there's given the law, right? All these pieces. So I would say that there are some specific departments that require more immediacy, especially if we want to clarify and bring truth to the situation.
And of course, in response to an urgent incident, no one is going to treat this as we have 3 days to respond, let's meet the 3-day deadline. Urgent incidents are urgent by definition, and everyone will be working on those.
So what if we said as soon as practicable, but in no case more than 3 days or something?
That still sounds like a safe harbor. I mean, I would say that need to be, depending, if there are exigent circumstances, immediate notice should be given. If there are not exigent circumstances, then notice no later than 3 days.
Of course, that's lawyers. I know. So just sort of breaking it down, though.
Well, put it in English, maybe.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. I mean, I'm going to use a school, I don't know more than what we've read about or heard about, which I still don't understand, because every word y'all are talking about, allegedly, maybe, it feels like we should all be upset it didn't happen or did. That's my opinion. That's not what I want to say. It feels like, to me, are we not directing the people who are concerned and in fear the most to the wrong place? I mean, I grew up here. I can say it this way. I'm calling the director of schools. I don't care who the mayor is. If something happened at my kid's school, I'm calling director of schools as a parent. And why are we almost furthering the gap of accountability by going through the mayor's office back to schools. I mean, I'm using the example that was in front of us for two reasons. One, based on what we learned the first day, in essence, it's very hard for the mayor to direct a principle of what that policy has to be. We can recommend, we can hope, we can want, but even further, look where it's going, whereas to me, the accountability is, I think, director of schools, elected school board, I mean, are we being fair to ask them to go here to then work their way back?
I don't think that's how it works, though. We'll get a call, I'll get a call, they'll get a call. And I'm not going to turn someone away and say, you need to call the director of schools. I'm going to call the mayor's office and say what's going on, or I'm going to call Turk and ask what's going on.
So why don't y'all focus on director of schools in that situation? All I'm saying is...
The mayor's office is available. The mayor's office is the way that we get the fastest response when somebody is available. It is a central person who then has the, also because it's hard to say, well, if this, then this person. The mayor's office historically has been the simplest direct answer.
But I think that misleads people to believe, right? I'm going to be candid with you. If you walk out here and knock on the doors, I would bet you this is true for sure in the immigrant community, that the mayor's office is everybody's boss. And that the mayor's office can make these things happen. They can't. And so you're not being, in my opinion, you're going through another route. The easiest may not be the best. Because there is a mayor's office, I get that part. And I agree with you. The mayor becomes, but that's probably where we start our problems. Because if it's a school issue, I had a school board member on that event call me and just said, hey, what in the heck's going on? Have you heard anything? I said, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't know anything about it. And the point I'm making is we're trying to give clarity and transparency and all that, but you're asking a person who's going to be up in a mayor's office to then go back to figure out, when it feels like to me, I would want accountability at the closest place to it. You guys would know, especially in the roles that you're in now, if we can educate ourselves on where the accountability of those places are and go directly at that versus a centralized mayor. I'm not saying that there aren't departments that, and by the way, the reason I said that, if I was the mayor and it took you 3 days as a department head to contact, you're not going to be the department head. That's just the facts. You can't say, and I'm talking about some unusual, because it reflects poorly on the mayor, reflects poorly on whoever the department is. But don't forget, schools really doesn't fit that. You know, and the sheriff's office doesn't fit that. And here's why. I don't want you calling the mayor's office for my issues. I say that. I want to know. You should hold me accountable.
You going to give us yourself?
What?
You going to give us yourself?
You don't she knows better. I have not been contacted. Not been contacted in 7 years by anybody. And there's a lot said that we could solve if that call is made. I want you to call me. I want you to call the director of schools. There's an elected school board rep should have to help get that resolved. It feels like to me, and this is advice, it doesn't help or hurt me, the accountability of the very first meeting we had is important because those people are in those jobs for different reasons, and the mayor should be able to make the directors that report directly to them respond, whatever his policy is. If I were the mayor, 3 days better not be the answer for something that would be as sensitive and unusual. So we can write what we want, but if you write that and it's really, look at who we're talking about. Most of the places most interesting to the groups we're talking about aren't reporting to the mayor. I'm not saying we don't want the mayor to help us get there, but I think it's a little unfair to put all of that up here and someone in constituent services, I have no idea, gets the call and is working their way down to try to figure out. When I would want you, you're the elected representative in my district, let's say, and I've called you with some alarming student concern, I would think that you should go directly to that division, area, whatever. You know, I'm not trying to diminish the mayor.
The mayor's office to know what's going on in their backyard is what it is at the end of the day. Because I'll get calls and I'll call departments and stuff like that. I'm still going to end up calling the mayor's office, hey, this is what's happening. Because I feel like that's important.
And I agree. I think that reporting is key. I think the mayor needs to be informed. But I think to go to what the sheriff is saying there, we don't want to send a message that the report is all that the department or agency has to do, that and have them just sit there and do nothing until they hear back from the mayor's office. I think we would expect to the sheriff's point, that after reporting, they're still going to be dealing with the problem on the ground. And then presumably we'll get feedback from the mayor that will perhaps help guide that, but we don't want them to just stop in place because they think reporting is all they have to do.
And I'm not suggesting.
And I don't think anyone's suggesting
Yeah.
that, but I do think that we need to perhaps be careful so that when we set out this this policy, that we are not sending a message that that's all we expect them to do.
I also want us to be careful that one person's exigent circumstances is another person's like routine, you know? Because there are things that have happened that entities haven't known about until 2 years later. I mean, so I just think we need to, I don't know how we deal with that, but I think your exigent circumstance might be different from another entity's exigent circumstance. So just throwing that out.
All right, so thinking about timeline, for any good department head is like not like, oh, well, I told John, so now I'm good, right? And as the sheriff said, if that is what a department head is saying, that person probably shouldn't be a department head anymore. But so it's going to be so hard for us to figure out the definition of exigent, right? But in any case, it's if something is big, like you got to call them right away. But if there's maybe for more accountability purposes than to guide their work, they've got to do it within 3 days so that outside groups or the mayor can hold them accountable. But common sense says like it should be immediate, not 3 days. But 3 days is more of an accountability measure than anything. Does that work just for, because in a second we're going to get to who they're calling in the mayor's office and we've only got 10 minutes left.
Are we going to do timing on C also or no?
Timing on
The periodic reports?
the sheriff was saying monthly, but here, hold on one second.
What is that? I don't know what that was. I don't know monthly, but
Is that what I heard? I think there was a phrase, it wouldn't be any extra work for us, and we could definitely do that.
And it may depend on the type of information that we're talking about.
what is the public records?
Seven.
7. I was just thinking that requirement.
Yeah.
You have to notify, I was just thinking of
7 business days.
7 business days, and all you have to do there is to notify, I was just thinking notify that you're working on it if you're, because there's a lot of that data. I was just.
All right, I wonder if we might move to who are you calling in the mayor's office? There's really 2 questions. The one is, who are you calling? John's going to give everybody a cell in a second.
I was trying to help him. Take it off.
And then the question of, like, who are you calling? And then, poor John is, but like, who are we calling? And then what is that person doing with those notifications? So how does the community get access to that sort of information? So again, when I was looking back at just using Mayor Biley's executive order as sort of a straw man, the thing that it said was produce and release a public report on its webpage describing the total number of requests received and some more about that, like what Metro Department received it, what happened with it. So maybe let's start first with in the mayor's office and.
Are we talking the urgent ones or the less urgent, or the periodic ones?
Are we maybe talking both?
I don't necessarily think
Could be different people.
Right.
All right, so let's take the, who are you going to call? Urgent.
So
And urgent, I'm saying, is the same as B.
Right.
Yeah.
Outliers.
Outliers.
John.
yes. So, a couple thoughts. First, I am the policy director, not the personnel and organizational director. We have a new liaison starting, but before I answer on the 21st, but I think that the right person to answer that question will be Mary or someone else in our office. I don't want to give the wrong answer now. If something urgent happens in the next week or 2, I will certainly suggest reaching out to Mary, reaching out to me. I'll give you guys all my contact information. It is clearly very important that we have excellent and multiple lines of communication. And I am happy and eager to be a part of that, particularly in my brief, which is really the policy brief. So we can all talk about that offline after this, and I can make sure you all have my information.
All right, so John, I'm hearing about that for the outliers, like in the next couple of weeks, call John or call Mary, but we'll really hear from Mary who in the mayor's office should get that urgent call.
Absolutely, as
Sort of
part
the
of this.
senior staff level, like has the authority to react quickly.
Right. And I do also want to make the point that I think this is a both-and situation. Your point, Sheriff, and your point, Bob, I think is an excellent one. If something comes out, of course you'll reach out to us. If it's a school incident, it is absolutely appropriate to reach out to the director of schools, to your school board. We heard a lot about concern around routine law enforcement operations. Clearly reaching out directly to the sheriff's office or MMPD to understand what's happening, I think that would be very helpful. So as we think about how this should work, and we all talk, let's talk about how to make some of those connections. I think that would be really, really useful.
Yeah, I think this group is a really good beginning of some really important future conversations. Yeah, Tori?
Seems to me that when we talk about these emergency situations, what we're really talking about is a public relations problem. That is that you want the right information out, you want it out quickly, you don't want it to be any more inaccurate than it might otherwise be. And it seems to me, and then we can sit here and say, should you be contacting the mayor or the school, the head of the schools, or the sheriff or the chief or whoever, but virtually all of them have a public information officer who is basically a crisis information manager. It seems to me that somewhere, I'm not saying what the policy ought to look like, but somewhere, those are the people that ought to be communicating. Because they have everybody, they are, and they can be more wired in to immediately initiate the process, whether the call comes to the mayor's office or it comes to the sheriff's department or it comes to schools or whoever. Somebody's going to be wanting public information, okay? And it seems to me the people that are charged with the responsibility of getting that information out ought to be charged with the responsibility of making a response. Let's get to the bottom of it. This is a schools issue. This is a sheriff's department issue or whatever it is. And I'm not saying there are not other things layered on top of it, but if we're trying to avoid misinformation, disinformation, whatever, it seems to me we need to have the people who that's their job, and they are going to know or would know after a policy and so forth. Hey, this is how we we come together and try to find out who it was that did this, and do we need to be concerned, or is there something happening that we don't know about, or whatever, or is it something that's just a rumor and didn't happen or whatever.
And so maybe that outlier circumstances person is the mayor's communications director or something like that.
I mean, I think the outlier type thing, that seems to me to be the loop. Not that higher ups don't know about it or shouldn't know about it, but that seems to me to be the people on the ground that are going to try to get the information and who then have the contacts to say, this is what happened, media, this is what happened, or this is not what happened, or so forth. I mean, it seems to me they're the sort of the first line as far as information is concerned. But
All right, I think that makes a lot of sense, Tori, and that can certainly be one of our recommendations to Mary, that there be kind of a comms element. So maybe the comms director is the person. Okay, we've got 3 minutes left. One of the things that we had wanted to figure out is, there's sort of some squishiness still around this periodic reporting of current practices and periodic reporting about the requests related to those practices. But let's say that is something that's going to start happening. I don't know if Mary, also John, would be the one to say yes, and that would go to a different person. It wouldn't go to our comms director. It would go to the director of the mayor's office of New Americans or somebody else. But is that sort of a...
We'll definitely have that conversation. It's clearly important.
Okay. So let's...
And I would take a conversation about what you then do with the data. Do you post it, make it public?
Yes. Yes.
Is it annually compiled or whatever?
Okay, so maybe at our next meeting, we can hear from the mayor's office about to whom these reports should come and what the mayor's office will be doing, both with the exigent ones, but then also with the routine ones. Is that a quarterly report that's on the Mayor's Office of New Americans website? Is that something different? But so, I'll just write mayor's office to report. Okay.
Can I also just briefly, before our next meeting, there is Austin, Texas, which operates in a somewhat similar landscape to us, has a policy devoted purely to reporting. It's mostly geared towards law enforcement, but I think it's really interesting and can sort of educate our discussion. They also, on the website, have their quarterly reports, which I found interesting just to sort of see what that can look like.
This is really helpful. Yeah, so homework, look through this because that can also help inform. I mean, we'll be encapsulating this in our report to the mayor's office, and so we'll want to know about this.
Other page, so out and out. Because pages 2 and 4
They might contain some really key stuff. Okay, here's the deal. So at our next meeting, we're going to. So here's where we did some of the suggesting. We'll be moved back into reviewing mode next time, and I think we'll have answers from the remaining departments that will be filling out the survey in the next few days. And we'll be looking at how they are, whether they are complying with requests from perceived federal immigration authorities. So we'll go back into reviewing mode next time. Again, the goal to understand that so we can put that into a report. I think we made a lot of great progress towards suggesting some pieces here. Okay, our next meeting, we're moving off of this time schedule so that Judge Escobar doesn't have to get substitute judges. And Audra really helpfully sent around a doodle poll, and everybody who responded can make this one time. So our next meeting is Tuesday, November 26th, from 3 to 4:15. So it's shorter. I wonder, could we make it 3 to 4:30? Is that going to screw up somebody's schedule? I don't feel like we're having a lot of extra time in these meetings, and I want to make sure that we can. So can we say Tuesday, November 26th from 3 to 4:30 here in the mayor's office media room? We weren't able to find consensus around the time for the fourth meeting, so I just wanted to flag that for you. And Audra, I wonder if you mind going back again with some suggested times. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Good meeting.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.